Hi everyone, it's Highlights from Ukraine podcast, your daily audio summary of the latest news reported in the Ukrainian media. My name is Artem, and here is the news. For 404 days, Ukraine stands strong against the forces of the Russian invasion. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said that all the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine will be liberated, so if Russian troops do not leave, they will be destroyed, reports Ukrinform. The president did not specify when the armed forces would be ready for the counteroffensive, but stated that the military was preparing to be strong in battle and liberate our land. According to the New York Times article, with Western weapons and newly created assault units, Ukraine is ready for a decisive spring counteroffensive, but the severe test will be to recover losses and maintain the motivation of war-weary troops, reports Ukrainska Pravda. The media believes that Ukraine's success in the battles on the southeastern plains would demonstrate to the world the decline of the military power of Russia, reduce concerns that the war has turned into swamp, and most likely would encourage Ukraine's allies to further arm and finance Kyiv. Ukrainian officers will have to organize attacks by artillery, infantry, and armored vehicles that will break through the Russian trenches, tank traps, and minefields. In the south, Russian units built defensive positions after being pushed out of the Kherson region in November. Modern Western tanks, which have better survivability and firepower, will be crucial for the elimination of these positions, the publication emphasizes. However, the New York Times notes the success of the armored forces of Ukraine is hardly guaranteed, as allies are in no rush to send weapons, and soldiers have to settle for crash courses in assault tactics. Weapons and equipment for breaching trench lines and crossing minefields appear in Ukraine, but it remains unclear whether they are in sufficient quantity, the publication writes. Yesterday, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelenskyy visited the Chernihiv region, in particular the crime scenes of the Russian occupiers in the village of Yagidne, reports Interfax Ukraine. The president was accompanied on his trip by Vice-Chancellor, Minister of Economy and Climate Protection of Germany Robert Habeck, and Secretary-General of the Council of Europe Maria Pejnović-Burić. The head of state, together with foreign guests, visited a school in the basement of which, from the 3rd to 30th of March 2022, the occupiers kept 367 civilians in unsanitary conditions, without water and food. There were 50 children among the hostages, including several infants. The youngest was 1.5 months old. 11 people died, unable to withstand the inhumane conditions. 10 were shot by the Russian occupiers. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, visiting the basement, wished Russian President Vladimir Putin to spend the rest of his life in the same conditions. After seeing all this, I wish the President of Russia to spend the rest of his days in the basement with a bucket instead of a toilet, he said. At the same time, Zelenskyy expressed gratitude to the Ukrainian military for the liberation of the settlement, as well as to local residents who resisted the Russian army. During the visit, the President of Ukraine presented Chernihiv with the badge of the hero city to honor it for the resistance it showed against the Russian forces a year ago. We would really appreciate if you could rate us, ideally with 5 stars, and leave us a glowing review in the apps where you are listening to this podcast: Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify. By doing so, you will help more people to learn about the podcast and truth about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Poland transferred the first batch of previously promised MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine, reports Interfax Ukraine. The head of the President's Office for International Affairs, Marcin Przydacz, has not specified how many jets were transferred. But on 16 March, Polish President Andrzej Duda announced the supply of 4 MiG-29s to Ukraine in the coming days. Przydacz also announced that President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelenskyy will visit Poland on April 5th, and there will be a conversation about the transfer of further aircraft. On March 17th, the Slovak government decided to supply Ukraine with 13 MiG-29 fighters. The first 4 of them have already been sent to Ukraine. Denmark and Norway have signed an agreement for the supply of 8,000 artillery shells to the Ukrainian armed forces, reports Militarny. The Danish Defense Ministry said Ukrainians are still in dire need of ammunition for their struggle for freedom against Russia. It is noted that the ammunition, the transfer of which is provided for by the agreement, can be used in Danish Caesar artillery pieces, the decision to transfer which to Ukraine was made by the Danish parliament at the beginning of the year. It is expected that guns and shells will be handed over together. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelenskyy thanked the governments of Denmark and Norway for this decision and said that timely military assistance from partners is the key to bringing joint victory closer. The Australian company Electro-Optic Systems will supply the Ukrainian army with up to 100 remote weapon systems worth up to $80 million, reports Suspilne. According to the company's press service, EOS has signed a contract with the Ukrainian state-owned foreign trade enterprise Spetstechno Export to supply Ukraine with up to 100 heavy remote weapon systems, including spare parts and related services. The contract envisions supply during 2023 and 2024. The remote weapon system can be installed on different weapons, for example a heavy machine gun of an armored vehicle, and allows to remotely control them without the need for a crew to get out of the armored cabin. According to the United Nations Children's Fund, at least 501 children have died since the beginning of Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine, and almost 1,000 children have been injured, reports Radio Liberty. The UNICEF Executive Director Catherine Russell stressed that this is just the UN-verified number and the real figure is likely far higher. According to her, the toll on families affected is unimaginable. Ukraine received the first tranche of $2.7 billion under the new Extended Fund Facility program of the International Monetary Fund, reports ICTV. The Ministry of Finance of Ukraine said that thanks to the funds received, Ukraine is able to continue to maintain its economic stability as well as to ensure priority expenditures of the state budget. The Highlights from Ukraine podcast is a commercial initiative of just two people, and we need your help to grow. Share information about the podcast, rate us in the app, subscribe to our Patreon. With your support, we are getting better. We call on you to demand from governments of your countries to impose the toughest sanctions possible on Russia and its citizens to stop their invasion of Ukraine.